The way that I draft patterns is in the abstract. I don't just make a sock or a sweater. I figure out how the sock works and how the sweater works, and then I build an abstraction. You go from there, and we're gonna see how the autofocus is gonna work here. I center myself a little bit. All right, I am going to assemble the sweater and explain my pattern process. No, this is not right. Come on. There we go. All right. I'm just mattress stitching from the bottom to the yarn marker. That's the side seam, and then we'll get something vaguely vest shaped out of this. Okay, so how do I even begin to explain this? My day job is as a software engineer. I've been doing this for a long while now, and it tends to creep into the rest of my life. And specifically with knitting, in the way that if I'm going to do anything more than once, I'm going to automate it. Which is part of why I don't knit by hand, because the same stitch over and over and over again is just duplicated work, and not the interesting part to me. The interesting part to me is figuring out what the pieces look like and how they fit together. So the way that I draft patterns is in the abstract. I don't just make a sock or a sweater. I figure out how the sock works and how the sweater works, and then I build an abstraction. And then I plug in concrete values, and from that I get a specific pattern. Doing this makes it a lot easier to make changes. So if I don't like how much ease there is, I can just change that quickly and get a new result. Or if I'm making something as a gift for someone and it's not myself, I can change the measurements, and I have a sweater that will fit someone else without too much effort. All of this math has to be done beforehand for machine knitting, because when we work on the machine, we have to weigh the work down, and it gets all stretched out. So you can't do what you do with hand knitting, where you just kind of measure and eyeball it as you go. You have to do the math beforehand and count out the number of stitches and make sure that you're going to get something that fits. And I can't count. I can't add. I'm bad at simple math. Normally it doesn't negatively impact my life, but when it comes to knitting, it would be helpful to be able to add. So instead of trying to do things myself and screwing it up, I just do it all in code. So for this pattern, no. At the moment, all of my patterns are available for free on my website. It's just a little React.js site that's hosted on Glitch. If you want to go see the code, you can. I did it this way because it was the easiest way to distribute my patterns. I probably, if I put a lot of time and effort into it, I probably could figure out a way to sell my pattern generators, but it's too much effort when I can just put them up there for free and have people use them that way. If anybody ever actually uses my patterns, I don't know if they do. But for this particular pattern, having it in code was really helpful, because I made a bunch of assumptions, because the original pattern is missing a lot of information, like a gauge, like modern needle sizes. So I had to make a lot of assumptions, and then when some of those assumptions were wrong, I could go back and correct them easily and get a new written pattern that I could work from. And that's what I did. So the pattern is available for free on my website. You just need your measurements, and you need a gauge swatch, and you can generate a pattern that you should be able to use, no problem. And it should even work for hand knitting. Like, this is not specific to machine knitting. It's just like this number of stitches and then that number of stitches and increase and decrease. For this whole project, for the raw materials, I spent $20. It was $20 worth of yarn, 10 skeins of this, what are we calling this? It's not heathered, it's tweed. This cream tweed yarn was on sale for $2 a skein. I wound up with 10 skeins of it. I probably could have gotten away with 8, but it was really helpful to have that extra 2 skeins because it meant that I didn't have to frog some of the pieces that were screwed up. So $20 in raw materials, but it gets more expensive than that when you take into account the time, my time as a knitter, and then my time as a software engineer, which we will get to. Probably going to have to be a different chunk of this. But this has been an interesting experience. This is the first historical pattern I have attempted to work with. It's the first real adaptation of a real thing that I have made on the knitting machine. Mostly I kind of just make it up as I go and draft my own patterns based on my knowledge of flat pattern drafting for sewing. But this one was something new and interesting, and like, it's amazing how much has changed and how little has changed. Like, when I was looking at the Bill Gates sweater and I found the same stitches on a sweater from the 80s as a sweater from the 1890s. And the fact that, like, I could knit all of the things that I needed to knit on the machine, it's crazy. We stand on the shoulders of giants. And it's always interesting to see where we've come from. That's my spiel. I knit like an engineer. It's not a bad thing, it's just, I don't know, it's the way that I function. Almost done with this seam. This sweater is a little loosey-goosey right now, but it will change in texture and size once I block it, because when you knit on the machine, everything is all stretched out and weighed down, but when it goes through the wash, it'll shrink back up to something more reasonable and more sturdy. All right. There's my seam. Ta-da! It's a little junky, but that'll block out nicely. All right, we're done here.